January 15th, 1947. Betty Bersinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter through the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles when she spotted what she initially thought was a broken department store mannequin lying in a vacant lot. As she moved closer, the horrifying reality became clear. It was the bisected body of a young woman, drained of blood, posed with clinical precision. The victim would become known as the Black Dahlia, and her murder would haunt Los Angeles for over 75 years. Subscribe to the Ember Files, where cold cases never truly die. The morning of January 15, 1947, was crisp and clear in Los Angeles. Betty Bersinger was taking her usual walk through the Leimert Park neighborhood when something in the vacant lot at 39th and Norton Avenue caught her attention. At first glance, it appeared to be a broken mannequin, pale and motionless among the weeds. But as Betty moved closer, the grotesque reality became unmistakable. This was a human body, and it had been subjected to unimaginable violence. Betty grabbed her daughter and ran to the nearest house, pounding on the door until the residents called police. LAPD officers arrived within minutes. What they found would become one of the most infamous crime scenes in American history. The victim was a young woman, approximately 22 years old, with black hair and pale skin. Her body had been severed at the waist, drained of blood, and posed with disturbing precision. The killer had clearly taken time to arrange the scene, suggesting this wasn't a crime of passion, but something far more calculated. The victim's face bore evidence of extreme violence, but her hands and fingernails were clean, suggesting she hadn't fought her attacker. Most disturbing was the complete absence of blood at the scene. The body had been killed and mutilated elsewhere, then transported to the lot. Detective Harry Hansen, a 20-year veteran of LAPD, took charge of the investigation. He had worked hundreds of homicides, but nothing had prepared him for this level of brutality. "Whoever did this has medical knowledge," Hansen noted in his initial report. "The precision of the cuts, the way the body was drained of blood, this wasn't random violence." The victim's identity remained unknown for 3 days. She carried no identification, and her fingerprints weren't in any criminal database. LAPD sent her prints to the FBI, who discovered a match in their civilian files. Elizabeth Short, born July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Massachusetts. She'd been arrested in Santa Barbara in 1943 for underage drinking, which was how her fingerprints were on file. Elizabeth had come to Los Angeles in 1946, like thousands of other young women, hoping to break into the film industry. She worked occasionally as a waitress, stayed with various friends and acquaintances, and was known to frequent the bars and clubs of Hollywood and downtown LA. But Elizabeth Short was no closer to stardom when she died than when she'd arrived. She was just another hopeful young woman trying to make it in a city that destroyed more dreams than it fulfilled. The investigation quickly became a media sensation. The Los Angeles Examiner coined the nickname Black Dahlia, playing off the recent film The Blue Dahlia and Elizabeth's preference for dark clothing. Newspapers published crime scene photos, offered rewards for information, and turned the murder into front-page entertainment. The media attention proved both a blessing and a curse for investigators. Tips poured in from across the country, but most were false leads or attention-seeking fabrications. Over 60 people confessed to the murder, but none of their stories held up under scrutiny. Detective Hansen pursued dozens of leads. Elizabeth's movements in the days before her death were traced through a network of friends, acquaintances, and casual encounters. She'd been seen at various locations around Los Angeles, but no one could account for her whereabouts in the final 48 hours of her life. The investigation revealed Elizabeth's complicated personal life. She'd been engaged to a soldier who died in the war, had relationships with several men in Los Angeles, and often told conflicting stories about her background and aspirations. Some acquaintances described her as naive and trusting. Others said she was manipulative and dishonest. But regardless of Elizabeth's character, nothing justified what had been done to her. The forensic evidence was both extensive and frustrating. The killer had clearly spent considerable time with the body after death, performing the mutilation and drainage with surgical precision. This suggested access to a private location, medical knowledge, and a disturbing level of psychological detachment. Dr. Frederick Newbar, who performed the autopsy, determined that Elizabeth had been kept alive for several days before her death, tortured systematically. The cause of death was hemorrhaging from lacerations to the face, but the bisection occurred post-mortem. The investigation expanded to include medical professionals, veterinarians, morticians, and anyone else who might possess the anatomical knowledge demonstrated by the killer. Hundreds of suspects were questioned, but none could be definitively linked to the crime. As months passed, the case grew cold. The media moved on to other stories. Detective Hansen continued working the case, but with no new leads and mounting pressure to focus on solvable crimes, the Black Dahlia investigation gradually faded from active status. The case remained officially open, but largely dormant for decades. Occasionally, new detectives would review the files, hoping fresh eyes might spot something previous investigators had missed. But the physical evidence was limited, witness accounts were inconsistent, and too much time had passed for many leads to be viable. In the 1990s, retired LAPD detective John St. John, who had worked the case in the 1960s, attempted to compile a comprehensive review of all evidence and leads. His conclusion was sobering. The killer had likely died years earlier, taking the truth with him. But the case received new attention in the 2000s when retired LAPD detective Steve Hodel published a book claiming his father, Dr. George Hodel, was the Black Dahlia killer. Dr. George Hodel had been a prominent Los Angeles physician in the 1940s. He was wealthy, educated, and moved in sophisticated social circles. He was also a suspect in the original investigation, though charges were never filed. Steve Hodel's theory was based on several factors: his father's medical knowledge, his known associations with Hollywood figures, and circumstantial evidence linking him to Elizabeth Short. Most significantly, Steve discovered that his father's home had been under LAPD surveillance in 1950, and recordings from that surveillance included conversations that seemed to reference the Black Dahlia murder. The recordings, made available decades later through Freedom of Information Act requests, captured Dr. Hodel saying, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead." In 2013, Steve Hodel submitted DNA evidence to LAPD, claiming that hair found at the crime scene matched his father's genetic profile. However, the DNA was too degraded for conclusive testing with technology available at the time. Recent advances in forensic DNA analysis have reopened possibilities for testing evidence from the Black Dahlia case. In 2024, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department announced they were re-examining physical evidence using new extraction techniques that can work with smaller, more degraded samples. The reinvestigation is being conducted quietly, without the media circus that surrounded previous developments in the case. Investigators are applying modern forensic techniques to evidence that has been preserved in LAPD storage for 77 years. Preliminary results have not been released, but sources close to the investigation suggest that DNA profiles have been successfully extracted from multiple pieces of evidence, including hair fibers and fabric samples from Elizabeth Short's clothing. If the DNA analysis confirms a match to any known individual, it could finally solve America's most famous unsolved murder. If not, it may definitively rule out certain suspects and allow investigators to focus on other theories. The Black Dahlia case has inspired countless books, films, and television shows, often focusing more on speculation than facts. But the real story is simpler and more tragic. A young woman with Hollywood dreams became the victim of an exceptionally brutal killer who managed to evade justice for nearly 8 decades. Whether modern forensic science can finally provide answers remains to be seen. But for Elizabeth Short's surviving family members and the investigators who have worked this case across multiple generations, the possibility of closure continues to drive the search for truth, because some cases refuse to die even when everyone who knew the victim has passed away. This is the Black Dahlia investigation, where 77 years of evidence may finally reveal the truth. Subscribe to the Ember Files. Some killers thought they were safe from science,